Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to draw a landscape in pastel. I'm going to use multiple brands of pastels and pastel pencils. I'm going to talk about that in the video. Let's see how it was done. So the first thing I did was the initial sketch where I drew the shoreline for the lake and the shape of some of these mountains in the background, so that I would know where to draw the sky. For the sky, I'm going to use light blue, sky blue, soft pastel. So I'm going to use a combination of soft pastels and pastel pencils. And I just did the initial sketch with a colored pencil, but now I'm just going to work with pastels. So I have to cover everything thoroughly with this light blue soft pastel. And once I have enough material, I'm just going to blend it with my finger. Your fingers are great blending tools with pastels. I talked about this many times because of the texture of your skin and the natural oils in your skin. They allow you to push the pastel into the grain of the paper and make it stick a little bit better. I'm working on a UART 800 sanded paper. This is a great paper for working with pastels. It can work with other media, but I think it works best with pastels and pastel pencils. I'm just adding a little bit of this slightly darker, stronger metal phthalo blue at the top. So I'm going to make the top part of the sky just a little bit darker and make a gradual transition towards the lighter value near the horizon, where there's going to be a little bit more clouds. So I'm going to blend these two nicely. Soft pastels blend really well. They blend very, very smoothly, as you can see. So the next stage is drawing the clouds. I'm going to have some clouds scattered all over the sky, and I'm going to work with a combination of a white pastel pencil and a soft pastel, white soft pastel. I'm going to use this pastel stick for larger shapes, basically, and I'm going to use the pencil when I need a little bit more precision. But I have to tell you, before I started working on the clouds, I applied a bit of fixative. So occasionally I do fix in between the layers. That way there is less muddying and the amount of dust is a little bit more manageable. So you see I'm fluffing up the clouds with my finger to make them look a little bit softer and more transparent in some places. In other places where I want to make them look thicker, or where I want to achieve more contrast with the background or a cleaner shape or a cleaner edge, I can just go back in with a pencil and go over that, increasing the amount of that lighter value. I especially do that around the top part of those shapes of the clouds, because the top part will be more exposed to the light from above, so it's going to be lighter and there's going to be more contrast, and that upper edge is going to appear more defined. At the bottom I'm going to add a little bit of darker color, well, not darker but less light, so a little bit of light cool gray, or I will just blend with my finger, allowing that lower part of the cloud to appear a little bit darker than the top part. And what I want to achieve, I want to have a bunch of clouds scattered over the top part of the scene. Some of them are a little bit smaller and kind of detached from the rest. Others bunched together into slightly larger shapes. And I'm going to draw them in such a way so that they are kind of converging onto the middle part of the scene. Which is supposed to draw the most focus from the viewer. But to do this, you have to be a little bit patient, but it's not that difficult to draw clouds in pastel. In the middle here we have some more mountains, but these are very far away, or at least they are much further away, so they're going to be of slightly different color than the ones in the middle. I'm going to start with a little bit of brown to do some initial shading and to draw the shape, but then I'm going to go over that with some bluish color to make the color a little bit cooler and a little bit more bluish, because when you look into the distance you will see that everything becomes softer in terms of value and contrast, and either more grayish or more bluish because of the atmospheric effect. So that's the effect that I'm trying to imitate here, so that I could convey that feeling of distance. So we can feel that this mountain or a group of mountains in the back is further away, like many miles further away. Anyway, I'm continuing to draw some more of these scattered clouds. As for the reference photo, it will be in the description as usual. Now, some of you who are following my channel may have noticed that this scene is somewhat similar to another landscape I've done recently, which was done like maybe a couple of months ago, which was done in charcoal. That's because it's based on the same scene, the same place, which is the Lake District. But this is a slightly different reference photo, and I just wanted to try this one in color, and I thought that pastels and pastel pencils would be a good option for that. So I took these reference photos from one of my Facebook friends, and he took some really nice photos during his hiking trip. So I thought that I would use them for some of my landscapes. Anyway, just drawing some more clouds here in the middle and on the right side. You can see how they're stretched out on both sides and kind of converging onto that middle area or central part of the drawing. And as usual, I'm fluffing them up and blending them a little bit with my finger, and then sort of reworking them with a pencil in those places where I want the clouds to be a little bit brighter or more defined. Now, as for the line of the water or the lake, the shore of the lake, I want it to be straight and level, so I actually used a ruler for that, and I used my pencil again, but now I'm going to switch back to pastels. For the top part of these slopes, of these hills here, I chose this reddish brown or dull reddish color. And this is a woodless pastel pencil. It's a Master's Touch woodless pastel pencil. So I have these. I have the Kohinoor pastel pencils. I have these Kohinoor soft pastels. I also have the Conti pastel pencils. I use multiple brands of pastels and pastel pencils because it's more or less all the same to me. I don't really care too much about the brands. It's just that I have some colors in one range that I don't have in another range, so I like to combine them so that sometimes I would get the colors that I need, that I can't produce any other way. Anyway, I threw in a little bit of ochre and a little bit of this light yellowish color at the bottom. Now the colors are looking a little bit too bright in comparison to the reference and in comparison to what I was trying to achieve. But that's okay, we're going to make them a little bit duller and a little bit darker. So here at the top I'm going to start throwing in a little bit of brown to increase the contrast with the sky, but also to make that top part a little bit darker. For the bottom portion I added some lighter colors like grey and a little bit of white to make it a little bit lighter and a little bit duller. So I'm hoping once I add those darker details and those brownish and even some black details, the colors will start to look a little bit more natural, because the colors are really quite a bit duller in the reference, but you know, we don't have to make it exactly the same as the reference. I'm never particularly worried about that. Anyway, I'm drawing some shapes of some larger rocks here in the background on one of those slopes, and in order to make them stand out against the terrain, I draw the lighter shape at the top and then a little bit of shadow at the bottom, because the top part is facing up towards the light source, and there's usually going to be a little bit of shadow under them. At the top of these peaks or these slopes, I'm going to have some trees. I used a little bit of yellowish green, and then I used some black on top of that. I'm going to do a little bit more of that once I draw some more trees which are a little bit closer to our viewpoint, but I'll get to that eventually. So I made the overall color of the slope here to the left a little bit duller and a little bit darker, and I'm still working with a bit more brown, trying to define some of the shapes within that slope. Like for example, here is another one that is slightly behind this one, and I'm making the top part a little bit darker. The reddish color that I used at the top was something like an Indian red. I don't really know the exact name or the exact number, but it doesn't really matter. And then in the middle I used something like a yellowish ochre color. I'm throwing in a few of the other colors as well, just to have a little bit more variety, but also kind of playing around with colors just to see what looks better. The sky looks pretty good. I'm not going to do too much more with it, because I'm pretty satisfied with the way it turned out. I need to focus on this middle part of the scene. So that slope over there in the middle has some darker shapes on it. Don't know whether those are some rocks or bushes, doesn't really matter. But we have some trees here, like a small group of trees. I used a combination of green and black, as I usually do. And I'm going to add a few more of them here. And these are slightly taller, slightly larger, because they're closer to our viewpoint. So I apply the green first, and then I add a little bit of black on top. And what I end up with are usually some dark green shapes, or a combination of really dark and mid-tone green shapes that kind of look like foliage at the distance. I can do the same thing whether I'm drawing coniferous trees or deciduous trees. It's the technique that I like to use with both colored pencil and with the pastels. It just works for me, just a simple combination of green and black, and they kind of end up looking like trees, as long as I can get the overall shape to look similar to the tree that I'm trying to draw. In the reference photo we can see some of these coniferous trees, but here in the middle there is something yellowish, like maybe a dry tree, or maybe a deciduous tree in the middle of these evergreen trees. I don't really know what it is, but I decided to include that detail just for the sake of variety. Variety of shapes and variety of colors. So you see, I added some suggestions of tree trunks there as well. I don't know how visible they are, but I'm hoping that the eye of the viewer will still pick up on those as well. So you see, we have a bunch of shapes on those slopes now, and the fact that they vary in size helps us see depth in the scene, because the trees which are closer to us are a little bit taller, a little bit larger, and the ones which are further away appear a little bit smaller. So there are a number of tricks you can use to convey that feeling of distance in your landscapes, but varying the size and the placement of individual elements like trees or rocks, you can actually help to suggest that feeling of depth and distance to the viewer. Adding some other touches to these slopes before I move on to the one on the right. The one on the right is supposed to look more or less similar to the one on the left, but a slightly different shape. Now, because I didn't get the color to look exactly right initially with the one on the left, I'm going to try a slightly different approach here, where I'm going to put down a little bit less pastel and allow the background color of the paper, that light sand color, to work for me in order to achieve a slightly lighter and slightly duller color a little bit more easily. So I'm simply applying a little bit less pastel, which means that whatever I apply here is going to be stretched thinner in some places, which is going to allow me to make the lower part of that slope a little bit lighter more easily. But the top part still needs to be kind of reddish brown, which is the way that I wanted it, because I think it makes for a nice contrast with the sky, both in terms of the colors but also in terms of the value. There are some darker details on these slopes as well. They appear kind of grayish or greenish. Now, there are multiple ways you can interpret these. You can interpret them to be just some darker rocks, or maybe there is even some bushes there, maybe there is some moss, maybe even some smaller trees. Doesn't really matter. But I'm just going to draw these darker shapes here using a combination of a little bit of that green and a little bit of black. And I'm going to leave the interpretation of those shapes to the viewer. Here at the top they're a little bit more concentrated, and then as we go lower down the slope, they're going to be a little bit more scattered. So like I said, maybe there are some sort of rocks, maybe there are also some bushes there, some trees, doesn't really matter. But I like the fact that we have that darker peak now, that darker shape that stands out nicely against the sky. And my edges are also fairly clean if you look at them. That's very important. It's important to have those clean edges so that the shape of the mountains would stand out against the sky. There are a number of ways you can achieve those clean edges, but if you have to rework the initial sketch, rework the initial shape, it's important to do that, because you want to have that clean edge, you want to have that clean contrast between the two. Just adding some more details on the left part of the scene, because I felt like reworking it a little bit so that it's more similar to what I've just done on the right, and just dragging my pencil here and there, the brown pencil, just to add some random detail and texture to the terrain. There are also some trees here to the right. These appear to be deciduous trees or bushes, whatever they are, but they're a little bit darker and a little bit duller in color, maybe some dry trees or bushes. So I decided to include those as well, because I thought that it would add a little bit more depth to the scene. So I'm just going to finish those before I move on to the surface of the water or the lake. Now, as for the water, there is an area of lighter value here, just right next to the shoreline, right next to the opposite bank. I'm going to make it a little bit duller and a little bit darker than the sky. The reflection overall, the surface of the lake will be a little bit darker than the sky. Just cleaning up the edge of that lake. And now I'm going to start drawing the reflections or the reflected images of these hills. I decided to fill in the brighter portion first to minimize the amount of smudging and mudding. So I decided to go in with the light blue pastel first. And I will add some other colors on top of that. I'm trying to get the shape to look close to what the objects above the water are, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. I'm adding a little bit of darker blue. This is something like an ultramarine, so slightly darker and cooler. And I'm going to throw in some other colors here and there just to make that reflection look a little bit duller and a little bit darker, because that's the way it's in the reference, but also it was my initial intention to make it a little bit darker. But also it has to be a little bit smoother, so there's going to be less detail, no texture, stuff like that. Here I'm throwing in some of those reddish and yellowish tones for the slope on the left. This is going to be its reflected image. Now with the reflections, my approach is fairly simple. I don't worry about the exact shape of things because or any details for that matter, because the images or the objects in the reflections are going to be distorted anyway to a certain degree, and they're going to appear blurry a little bit. But the thing is that I want to match the placement of lighter and darker shapes, because if I have a darker shape above that line of the water, you can kind of look at it as a mirror. And if you have a darker shape, you want to match it with a darker shape on the lower part of the scene, in the surface of the water, so that it looks like a reflected image. If you have a lighter shape, you want to draw a lighter shape in the reflected image. And as long as you can roughly match the placement of those lighter and darker shapes, the surface of your water, or whatever it is that you're drawing, either a lake or a river, it will look convincing. But I'm also dabbing on this with my finger to make it a little bit blurrier, because you don't want to have texture in that reflection. You want to make it look softer, because the images, the reflected images, are going to appear blurry and distorted because of the gentle movement of the water. I also want to throw in a few clouds here. We're going to have some reflections of the clouds as well, which is why I'm making some parts of that bluish water there a little bit lighter. So the shape of the sky and the clouds is also reflected in there as well. We have reflections of the slopes, reflections of the trees, and this is pretty much as complex as I want to make it, because, like I said, the reflected image doesn't have to be as detailed, doesn't have to be super accurate. It can be a little bit blurry, and I also have another trick up my sleeve, because I'm going to be drawing some other objects on top of that. I'm going to be drawing some rocks, but I'm just going to add some ripples here around the edge of that reflected image of the slope, so that it looks like the gentle movement of the water is breaking up that shape, that line of that mountain, which is being reflected in the water on the left. Just want to make it look like some small ripples in the water breaking up that edge. And then here I want to draw a slightly darker blue shape to create the reflection of that group of mountains in the middle. It has to be a little bit darker than the rest so that it would stand out. So now if you look at the scene, it's starting to look like a reflection. All we have to do is draw the reflection of the slope to the right. Again, I'm not going to be bothered with all the tiny details and shapes. I'm just going to try to match some of the values. You can see that here and there is a little bit of muddying. I do create a little bit of mess along the way, but it's not a problem because with soft pastels I can easily fix it and work on top of that. So here this top part, or in this case the bottom part because it's in reverse, it has to be a little bit darker. I just smudged it a little bit and now I'm ready to start drawing the rocks. So before I started working on these rocks, which I'm working on now, I sprayed the bottom portion of the scene with a fixative one more time. So I used fixative between layers 2 times during this drawing process. That's because I wanted the shapes of those rocks to be cleaner. I wanted there to be less muddying and less blurring because of the layers and layers of pastel dust under them. So when you fix them a little bit, it becomes easier, it becomes more manageable. So these rocks here, the ones which are further away from our viewpoint are going to appear a little bit smaller. The ones which are closer to us are going to be a little bit larger. I'm going to use the black to draw the darker shape or the shadow area of the rocks, which is down facing away from the light source. And the top part will be kind of grayish, but maybe with a hint of brown or some other colors. So the top part, which is facing up or is exposed to the light, is going to be lighter, and as you can see, by drawing the light side and the shadow side, I'm creating something that looks like a 3-dimensional shape or a bunch of 3-dimensional shapes. And they will also have a little bit of a reflection under them as well. This is obviously the shallow part of the lake here because we can see some of those rocks showing through the water. And the photo was obviously taken from the bank of the lake, which is closer to our viewpoint. And then we have a few more of these rocks here in the middle. When I want to make the top part even brighter, I can use a little bit of white. The reflection is a little bit darker. I can use some bluish color and a little bit of brown for the reflection. If I feel like the color of the stones or those rocks is a little bit too dull, I can always throw in a little bit of reddish color or a little bit of brownish color. Just adding some more ripples to the surface of the water here and there so that it would look a little bit more convincing. And now I'm continuing to draw some more rocks here. Stretching out towards our position, towards the viewpoint. The one here in the corner to the right is going to be the largest because it's also the closest to our viewpoint. Just going to go over that with some grey, use some black and dark brown at the bottom for the shadow area. And try to create something that looks like a rough surface. This is also a little bit easier when the layer underneath is fixed. It's easier to produce those rough, grainy textures that you sometimes deliberately want to produce when you want to create a rough looking surface that looks like it has a lot of detail. If the pastels underneath weren't fixed, there would be more muddying and it would appear a little bit smoother. So it's sometimes a good idea to fix between the layers. Sometimes you may not want to do that because you want to blend more easily, but sometimes you may want to fix a little bit. So this rock on the right also has its reflection. I'm just putting in some more details and some finishing touches and adding a little bit of reddish and brownish color to some of these rocks so that they would look a little bit more interesting. And I also like that contrast between the reddish details and the bluish ones. And there are also some darker details here where we see the reflections of those trees on the right. And just finishing these corners where I need a little bit of light blue pastel. I'm also going to make some of the reflections of these clouds just a little bit brighter so that we could have more contrast there in that bluish part of the water. And of course I'm going to blend them so that there is no texture. I need some more lighter value here in the middle as well. You'll find lots of landscapes on my channel, whether they are in pastel, colored pencil or charcoal, so be sure to check out my other videos. Give me a like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think about this one. Just drawing some more of these clouds, and now the drawing is done. I'm gonna put my signature here on the left side, and that's pretty much it. If you want to see a lot more content, and if you want to see the full-length version of this video and other videos, you can check out my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye bye.